that this is a very prolonged discussion over months, maybe years actually, because of the way Dr. Berger and myself deliver individually and then get together to talk about our respective takes on the step as a principle, as a function of emotional sobriety. So there's lots of puzzle pieces here. I do believe that anybody who attends any one of them will have a modular experience that will be sufficient to warrant attending one of them. But if you have a real interest in connecting the dots and seeing the picture as the puzzle pieces are developed, it would be in your best interest to go back and access the prior recordings in the order that makes sense to you, so that you can begin to see a more complete picture than any one presentation delivers. Emotion, and both Patrick and Susan mentioned the big picture here. Lest we lose focus, I'm a big proponent of context, is emotional sobriety. Well, of course, emotional sobriety comes after physical sobriety. And physical sobriety comes as a guarantee of the spiritual awakening for doing the first 9 steps. So we're assuming that you know some of that, maybe have experienced some of that, maybe all of that. And I also want to mention that, and you see it on the PowerPoint, that I have a website that has lots of resources for anybody who is interested in the big book and the step work. That's my focus. And I also have a YouTube channel that has lots of recordings about all of the things that both Dr. Berger and I are talking about, connected to the 12 steps and emotional sobriety separately and together. It would also be important to really embrace the prayer that was set the tone, well, from my standpoint. And I heard you, I hope you heard it and embraced it. Many of us hear prayer at the beginning of something, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, sure, get that over with. It's really the intention of prayer to connect to a power in the universe within ourselves, that we made a decision in step 2 exists, and we made a decision in step 3 that we have a relationship with. All potentially fairy tale in our actual experience, but our faith decision, our choice with our free will, our decision with our free will to take the action of steps 4 through 9, as empty as it might seem, translates into the action of actually taking the steps. So step 6 is, of course, based on all of those assumptions. I'm powerless in step 1. No choice about addiction, and no choice about even managing my life and having a quality life. That there, I hope, is a power, and that power is available. Could God exist? Item B, page 60 of the ABCs. And I guess it's item C. Could and would. That's no accident. That's not poetry. That's a precision that's available to us. Thank God to Bill Wilson. He says these are precisely the suggestions and directions, precisely in italics in the big book. Could, there is a power. Would, that's a caring power. It probably will help you to think in terms of just the biggest of metaphors of light and darkness as I talk. Yeah, I'm doing a big warm-up on step 6. Step 6 and 7 in the big book are just 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph on page 76 is step 6. 1 paragraph. And the key to that paragraph is the word willingness, which is the principle, I believe, of step 6. The principle of emotional sobriety, willingness. And then the second paragraph on page 76, which we'll talk about in a few months down the road. It's 1 paragraph, and the entire paragraph is just a prayer. Well, just a prayer is a prayer. The 7-step prayer. It's very difficult to talk about one or the other without talking about the other. But I'm going to focus on step 6 with a little crossover to step 7. And next time I'm doing a particular individual step, I'll focus on step 7 with a little bit of back story on step 6, because that's my experience with it. I was 5 years sober when I did the work of the steps out of the big book. I got sober in February 20th, 1984. Yeah, I've been around for a while. But I did, and I got a sponsor pretty quickly, and a story for a different day. And my sponsor didn't know, and I didn't know until I did, that he didn't know much about the big book or the steps. And it was 5 years I was sober when I met a man who did know. And I could tell, and he had experience, and he was willing to show me the path through the steps out of the big book. I needed a translator. I'm reasonably intelligent, fairly well educated. I read English pretty well. I couldn't figure out the big book. And I'm saying that because if any of you are having any problem with any step or the steps themselves or recovery and or awakening, especially that big book, please find somebody who not only understands it, but who has an experience with it. And you know that because it manifests in their life. They are changed, not just in the way they think and feel, but in the way they behave. That's the definition of a spiritual awakening from my standpoint. All right, enough of the warm-up. Step 6, we're entirely ready. I mean, entirely? To have God. That's why I gave the preamble comments on steps 2 and 3. Bill's not messing around here. Now, the word God, of course, is not the reality. I'm not going to do a teaching on steps 2 and 3. It's needed as a reminder because so many people have a negative valence or some unfortunate understanding or experience about the word God. The word God is not God. It's the symbol of the reality for which there is no adequate word or symbol. The book generously says, and wonderfully inclusively says, God as we understand God. Within the last 5 years, I've been saying to people, God as I don't understand God. Oh, I have a relationship with whatever the reality is, and it's a vital and vibrant relationship. But I'd much rather call it spirit or mystery, because spirit represents the breath and or the wind, and this mystery is as elusive as attempting to grab the wind or the breath. So it is this impossible act of faith. God is. This reality exists and it cares. And I'm in relationship with it, counting on it, that it will remove all of the defects of character. Now, of course, that's language from the 30s and 40s. Bill Wilson had the language of the culture at the time. Defects of character and shortcomings was the language. He was asked, and I've heard it on tape, defects of character in step 6, shortcomings in step 7. What's the difference, Bill? And he just laughed. No, literally on tape. He said, there's no difference. I was taught in my basic English classes that we do not use the same word or phrase in consecutive sentences. They're synonyms. Now, if you've heard Dr. Berger at all, you may have heard him say, today's language would perhaps be ego defense mechanisms. That was the language I learned in the 60s and 70s when I was doing my graduate work in psychology. But then he will say, but today, even in the 21st century, we use unhealthy coping strategies. And I'm not softening it. I hope I'm just making it more relevant, more recent, more current, and opening up your mind and your heart to what we're talking about here. Bill very clearly and biologically calls it instincts gone awry. I believe in the 12 and 12. Instincts gone awry. That's a classic phrase. Instincts. Fight, flight, freeze. If you've heard my comments on step 4, I unpack that in a way that might be useful. I'm not going to do that today. The prayer that Susie invited, I believe it was Lisa that prayed the prayer of the set aside, is based on one of the phrases in the big book, of course, many of the phrases, but Einstein said, the consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. I need a new lens through which to look. I need a new consciousness because the consciousness that I have has created the problems that I have. And any solution I come from that consciousness will, in fact, have the problems embedded in it. Yeah, it's an admission of I'm flawed. And I can't get around it on my own. And I'm not asking this reality, this power, to give me the power to set it aside. It isn't, God, please give me the power to set aside. No, it's please, spiritual intervention, bring your crowbar, open my mind and open my heart, and deliver me to a place that I don't even know exists. I'm serious. This is not poetry. This is not some sort of fancy words that I'm using to try to communicate. No, I am using these awkward words to try to communicate an experience that I've actually had. Delivered to a place I did not know exist until I was there and woke up to it surprised. See, this is addiction, the bondage, Bill calls it, spends a lot of time on the first half of the first step. And structurally in the big book, he didn't spend any time on the second half of the first step. This is really critical for the balance of the step work. Because they're really not about addiction. They're about unmanageability. And Bill uses the term, the bondage of self. So we have the bondage of addiction that's taken care of pages 1 through 43, and the bondage of self that's taken care of in chapters 4 and 5, at least as the way I was introduced to the material in the big book. unmanageability embedded in step 2, unmanageability embedded in step 3, instructions in the big book. Bill tells us that we're building a spiritual arch through which we walk to a new freedom. Oh, I think it's on page 47. Willingness is the cornerstone. Step 2, what you'll note is, at least if you followed my understanding of an explanation of the steps, is all of the even steps are inventory steps, knowing steps, and all of the odd steps are decision, choices, and action steps. It's very interesting dynamic to help me understand each step and all of the steps together. Step 2, willingness, the cornerstone. Step 3, a decision to turn, putting my free will into action, a commitment to do steps 4 through 9, the keystone, that stone that holds the entire arch together. And step 5, of course, we talked about that last series, to disclose everything that we wrote down in step 4 about our resentments and our fears and our sex and our dishonesty and our secrets. Which leads us, of course, from step 5 into step 6. We disclose all of this material, looking at our beliefs, our motives, especially our behaviors. And then again, looking after a meditation that's indicated on page 75, the conclusion and the promises of step 5, we move on to step 6. Because we're looking for freedom, freedom from addiction, but more especially in my experience and my surprise, freedom from unmanageability. No, I'm saying it. Freedom from unmanageability. Yes. As a result of these steps, I have been invited and empowered to manage my life. Yep. Herb manages his life. This is emotional sobriety. Taking full responsibility for the way I think, full responsibility for the way I feel, and most especially full responsibility for the way I behave. I'm not a victim and was converted from a victim into a responsible person. I'll be kind. In 1988-89, when I did this work for the first time, but I did it 2 more times over the next 10 years with 2 different people, step guides, as I call them. And it was that final journey that broke the code on steps 2 and 3, as well as unmanageability in step 1. Rounded it out in terms of a full experience of my humanity and also my spirituality. That first journey through the steps, though, was a journey that allowed me to name my character defects. That's the terminology I used in 1988, the terminology in the big book. I had looked at step 4 deeply, resentment and fear and dishonesty, especially in my sexual behavior. And the root cause, as Bill says on page 62, the root cause is our selfishness. The root cause of these instincts gone awry, fight, flight, and freeze, but just survival instincts. It's not a negative comment. It's not a diminutive. It doesn't diminish us. It's merely representing this is the animal in us. Fight, flight, freeze. That's how we survive. Now, because of our nature and or our nurture, external and internal kinds of developmental pressures, We have emotional reactions that turn into resentment and fear and dishonesty, as manifested primarily, at least in my case, in my sexual behavior. But Bill says very clearly in the big book, if you haven't seen it, it's a great phrase because it summarizes the issue, page 14 at the very top. Simple, but not easy. A price has to be paid. It means the destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn. There it is, step 3. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. So hold on to that metaphor, that poetry, light and darkness. In step 1, we saw the darkness of addiction and the darkness of unmanageability. In steps 2 and 3, we identified that there is light. No, step 2, there is light. And it's deep inside me. Check out page 55. And that I can have a relationship with it. Check out pages 62 and 63 concerning step 3. A relationship with a caring light, with a caring power. And the purpose of steps 4 through 9, that commitment of step 3, to finish the 9th step. Yes, my experience, 100%. Personally, and also with the people that I've worked with. A person can finish. Might take some creative spirituality. The invitation and the promise is to finish step 9 for freedom. The freedom of forgiveness, at the very least. You might have heard Dr. Berger and I talk about that. Step 6, though, the key is, we name it again, another inventory, the summary of the instincts on the list there. And we also are very clear, because of steps 4 and 5, that we're powerless over them because we've tried. We know better, we don't do better. Sometimes we don't even know better and therefore don't do better, whether sober or not, whether practicing all of the growth steps or not, 10, 11, and 12. We recognize and embrace our humanity, emotional sobriety. I'm a flawed human being, flawed, because I'm human. That materiality of instincts gone awry. And yet I'm invited to manage those instincts in step 10. When I'm disturbed, to take the formula of step 10, so that I'm undisturbed by being in alignment with reality. The word alignment's not in the big book, but it's the best word for step 10, I believe. It's the best word for the goal and commitment of step 3. Alignment with reality as it manifests 1 second at a time. You might want to look up the word narcissism in a dictionary, and or look up in the DSM the description of personality disorder. I'm not going to go over it here. That's a page from my Way of Life document on my website, which does both of those things. It captures from the DSM a description of personality disorder, as well as the 9 characteristics of narcissism. When I lead people through step 6, I find it particularly productive to see what the professionals have to say about it. This is the psychiatrist, the medical doctors, and the psychologists' description of a personality disorder. Now, it may or may not be true on a scale of 1 to 10 at the 10 level for any of you. But at the 1 or 2 level, it's probably a very apt description of self-centeredness, as Bill phrased it in the big book, for all of you, each one of us. And it may be age and stage related. If you're relatively new to the 12-step program, on a scale of 1 to 10, it might be more severe. I know that I still have narcissistic tendencies, but they're probably at the 1 and 2 level at this point in my own personal spiritual and emotional development. This is freedom. The freedom to know better and the freedom to do better. Notice I recognize I'm not a victim any longer. I'm holding the bars. There's no ceiling, there's no walls, there's no floor. There's just pathetic Herbie constructing and holding the prison bars, not knowing that he constructed it and is holding it until he does, and then he can release it. Just release the grip. Now, I can't do that on my own, and that's another insight into step 6. It's an acknowledgement of powerlessness to even release the grip when I know that it's me that's got my beliefs that are delusional and my motives that are corrupt. But I can't change my behavior on my own. I disclose these shadows in step 5, the beliefs and the motives and the behaviors. That's the key to step 5. But the key to step 6 is to see that these are instincts, biological. These are inclinations, psychological. I'm making a distinction between body and mind and emotions. This is the source of the problem in me, my materiality and my humanity. It's not that there's something wrong with me. There's just something that hasn't been developed properly or managed with intelligence and with consciousness, with prayer and accountability. This is what step 6 and 7 are all about. I mentioned that I would gently combine them in some of my comments. That's one of them. Prayer and accountability. I did not know that going into step 6. I did step 5 on Friday, a 10-hour 5th step. That was my very first thorough 5th step out of the big book. And then on Saturday, he had me do the assignment on step 6, which is reading the big book, highlighting it, that one paragraph on page 76, reading the chapter in the 12 and 12, which actually gave a lot more clarity to step 6 because it talks about instincts gone awry. And then going back over my 4th step and 5th step information and making a list of those character defects. That's not an instruction in either of those books, but it was the instruction from this man. Make a list specifically of your character defects, which I did. And then in step 7, which I did on Sunday, much more about that next time, but just a little bit. He had me write out my own, on Sunday, write out my own 7-step prayer, not to improve the one in the book, but to understand the one in the book. And then to get on my knees, not in the big book, but it was his instruction, and pray the prayer. More about all of that, step 7, in the next time I visit with you. But the point here is on step 6, I made this list. And on Sunday, I wrote out the prayer because I wanted these clouds in me that were blocking the light in me to be removed. And I knew that this process was a prayer because I was powerless. And that these were the obstacles not only to my relationship with the light in me, but also with my true self. You hear Dr. Berger, myself, talk about that in the context of emotional sobriety. the deconstruction of the false self so that the true self can manifest itself. The deconstruction. That's what I quoted from page 14. The destruction of self-centeredness. Bill uses that language. The destruction. It needs to be deconstructed, this false self, by the light, of course, the light of exposure, the light of understanding, and the light of prayer, because I'm powerless. Check out the resentment inventory, the fear inventory, the sex inventory. Every one of them says that in some place, it's embedded in it, sometimes a little more subtly, but it's there. You can name it, you can understand it, and you can talk about it, but you can't remove it. And in fact, in most cases, you can't even change it without prayer. The biggest address of that is in the resentment inventory, pages 66 and 67, which he gives us a page and a half on a prayer practice for the removal of deep resentment, but also in the fear inventory. If you have fear, pray to remove it. In the sex inventory, create a sex ideal in prayer, and in prayer, try to live up to it. Every one of them is underneath the assumption, I'm powerless. I am powerless to be a decent human being on my own will, not just as an addict, but as a human being. Addiction is one thing that's taken care of pages 1 through 9. But Bill says on page 84, 85, we're not cured. We have a daily reprieve from, he doesn't tell us, but my assumption is from unmanageability, the human condition, not the addict condition. That's why in the preface to the first edition, I believe he can say, look it up in the preface to the first edition. First paragraph, first page, preface of the first edition. At the end of the first paragraph, our way of living may have its advantages for all. It's so relevant here, especially when you see the headlines in the news of the day internationally. Unmanageability, it's rampant, it's pandemic. And this is the remedy, this is the prescription, this is the preventative. Willingness. My willingness, which in self is a gift. Bill says in step 2 on page 47, willingness is the cornerstone, that first stone placed on the foundation that sets the direction of the entire arch. But he also implies in step 4, willingness, not only to name it, but willingness to reveal it, willingness to adjust to it, willingness to pray for its removal so that we can change. My definition, based on Appendix 2 in the back of the book, 567, 568. Read it if you haven't read it. Reread it if you haven't read it recently. It tells us what is a spiritual awakening. I think that's the first lesson I give to anybody who comes to me for help. Read the Appendix 2. Because it's Bill's way of telling us what he means by spiritual awakening, the promise of the 12th step, isn't it? Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. I'm quoting, it's not a paraphrase. I emphasize the. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. It's incumbent on us to know what is a spiritual awakening. My definition, a change. That's what step 6 is all about. A change in the way we think and feel and behave. And it's done to us because I'm powerless to accomplish it. Religion, psychology, therapy, self-help. I tried everything. AA, I tried AA for 5 years. I did not change. I was given the grace of abstinence from alcohol before I ever came to AA. Now, of course, when I came to AA and went to meetings and had a sponsor and held myself accountable and I didn't drink, my life got better. But I was still restless, irritable, and discontented at 5 years of sobriety. And I didn't know that I was. And I didn't know that there was a solution. But through this process, I came to step 6 and was confronted with a real question: willingness. Are you willing to change? Are you willing to be changed? Very different. I'm willing to change, and then I recognize I cannot do that on my own. More about that when I talk about step 7. I became willing to be changed specifically. This was the key: to name and have removed those specific items that are generally called defects of character or shortcomings, or today would be called unhealthy coping strategies, or in my language, not to do with psychology, but to do with English, I call them inclinations, which is that instincts, that biological drive for survival, inclinations, and behavior. How do they manifest in my life? Typically resentment and fear and dishonesty. The emotional manifestations in my behavior of the inclinations of fight, flight, and freeze. This way we're built as animals, as human beings, but we're invited as human beings to engage our cortex rather than our instincts and our limbic system, that is the emotional system, those first 2 brains. We're invited to use our cortex to become conscious and then to take healthy actions through decisions and to adjust those decisions based on the feedback we get. When we're disturbed, it's because we're perceiving and or reacting incorrectly to reality. And it's up to us to make a decision to be in alignment with reality. Some of that requires prayer. Step 10, the first recommendation. Some of that requires accountability. Step 10, the second recommendation. Pray and then talk to somebody about it. The third recommendation in step 10, of course, is to make amends if you've created harm. But finally, the final turning from my self-centered disturbance to the other-centered alignment is to think about helping somebody else. The fourth recommendation in the 10th step on page 84. Now, Bill doesn't tell us actually to do something in that fourth recommendation. He said, think about helping somebody else. Brilliant psychological insight, knowing that if we are thinking about somebody else, we're not thinking about ourselves. And if we're thinking about helping somebody else, eventually we will help somebody else. So ask yourself the question, am I willing to go to any length? That's the question we're asked on page 58. That's one of the questions I ask people. What does it mean, willing to go to any length? It's on page 58. If you want what we have and are willing to go to any length. Now, you hear lots of interpretation about that in meetings, all well-spirited, good intentions. But the only actual answer that the big book is suggesting willing to go to any length means is on page 58. If you want what we have and are willing to go to any length, what we have is sobriety, and we have a spiritual awakening. That's the promise on page 84. Neutrality, and we enter the world of the spirit. If you want what we have, spiritual awakening, and are willing to go to any length, here's the answer. Then you are ready to take certain steps. That's when he introduces us into the third step, which is a commitment then to do steps 4 through 9. Commitment to do steps 4 through 9. Finishing step 4. Revealing it in step 5. Engaging in a prayer practice, perhaps on an ongoing basis, with regard to our mischief in terms of character defects du jour, and to clean it up in terms of our relationships with other people, and then to commit to a life of living in the spirit, our way of life. Inventory, step 10. Prayer meditation, step 11. Helping others based on principle, living a life of principles. This is what we're talking about here. What are the principles? Embedded in each of the steps are many principles, and we try to make visible what at least the primary one is. The question is about freedom. Remember the person behind the jail bars that needed to just loosen the grip on the bar so they'll fall to the ground and be free? That's what we're talking about with the steps. It's about freedom. It's not about addiction. Certainly it's about freedom from addiction, but that's the minimum promise. The real promise is freedom from unmanageability. To take responsibility to manage your life. At the end of the 5th step, there's a wonderful meditation and a set of promises on page 75. And in there's a wonderful line that I envision every morning in my meditation. Walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Gosh. I could just go into it. Walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. You see, I'm in partnership. I'm not the managing partner, but I am responsible to manage my life in partnership with the managing partner. God is my partner. The spirit is my partner. The mystery is my partner. And I use that partner as the same way I would the GPS. I have the responsibility to manage my life. I have the responsibility to determine purpose and destiny. I have the responsibility to figure out right and wrong. I have the responsibility to foster that relationship with the partner, and then to listen to the guidance that I get from the partner, and to adjust when in fact things are not going as I had hoped they would in terms of quality of life. Either adjust my goals or adjust my behavior. How free do I want to be? How soon?